Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg, and this is It's Okay to Be Old, a show about all things aging well. My guests today are a husband and wife team extraordinaire, Mary and Don Iannone, both extremely accomplished in their own right. Mary's retired from healthcare administration, and Don from economic development and public policy. They spent 7 years at the Cleveland Clinic Cancer Center supporting cancer patients and their families. Welcome, Mary and Don.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We appreciate the opportunity to share and be with you.
Now, I read your article in the Four Windows on the end of life and immediately wanted you to come on to have the conversation about how our view of death shapes our view of death, shapes our view about life. We all have a very, very specific view about what death is and how we're supposed to feel around it. And then often when it happens, it's not what we expected. And I think that's what I want to talk about is that often many of us have a black and white view based on whether it's religion or what we were taught or fears. And so I really want to delve into that and talk about how we view it affects how we respond to it. Now, after both of you having long, successful careers, you embarked on a journey of helping patients and their families throughout the dying process. How'd you get into doing this?
Well, I think we each had our personal reasons for doing it, but why don't you start, honey, with the
Well,
your experience?
I I worked at the Cleveland Clinic here in Cleveland as an executive, and I did that for 36 years. And I saw a lot of caregiving, as you can well imagine. I was not a professional caregiver. I was on the administrative side, but I could take 34 years just to talk about how wonderful it is when patients understand the end of life and what it truly means. And so we decided that when we retired, we would go down that road of trying to help patients ourselves. And the clinic hired us. And for 7 years, we provided care to patients who were in need of spiritual, personal, any kind of need they had. And I found it to be now, out of the 46 years that I can say I was with Cleveland Clinic, those years were the most formative years in my life in terms of finding out what life is really about and how life impacts others so much differently than it impacts myself or my family or even their families. So that's how I think we got started. But
We did. Do you want to share about your dad and the experience he had?
sure.
Yeah.
My dad was a firefighter in East Cleveland for 35 years, and he became very ill. He was in an explosion in a hospital laboratory trying to help put out a fire. And so he came down with lung disease and emphysema, and he became very sick. And in his early 70s, he passed away. And that had a profound impact on me, watching him die so early and not being able to be with us. So we just kind of talked about what we would do in our elderly years. And so that had a huge impact on me personally.
How old were you at the time?
My dad was 76, so I was probably
Yeah. 1999. So you were 58.
58, yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't early on that I,
Yeah.
discovered what Reiki and all of the other complementary medicines are.
I just want to, I know we didn't discuss this in the pre-interview, but just, sort of just want to interject this a little bit is I'm 64 now, but I remember when we were young, 50 was considered very old. 65 was, 70s were like, wow, you've outlived the whole world.
Yes.
Now, today, it's like, as my husband's 78, and as you know, we all of us have a friend who's 75 and running a marathon, or doing something extraordinary. There you go. Right. So it's a whole different thing. So I think that must have an impact on the way that we view it as well, because we're realizing now that we're here. Yes, you're an older adult, but you're still here, and you're you're a fully formed person, living a very rich life.
Yeah, indeed. One thing I wanted to add, and Mary and I experienced this together when her dad did die. It was at university hospitals, and we were all there. The whole family was there, and he was really struggling. And his last words were, "Can't somebody speed this up? I'm not able to handle this anymore." And so the attending physician and nurse came in, and they had no concept of how to deal with the fact that he was really on the verge of death.
And he was ready to go. He was asking to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they were giddy, and they didn't know how to deal with it. It was a lack of empathy, compassion. And I remember that was really a trigger.
Yes.
And you said, we've got to do something to change that. And Mary obviously tried to make a difference also on the clinical side as an administrator at the clinic, but how unprepared sometimes medical professionals are, and not knowing how to just be present,
right,
and do the basic things that are important, just in holding people. And so I think that was.
It was. And it was a resident who came in, and he just sauntered through the door and said, "Hi, folks, what's going on?" Yeah. And I remember one of us turned around and said, "My father's dying." So that kind of, as Don said, put us on a path to figuring out how we can help people.
Yeah.
Mary, you worked with adults and children in a facility, and Don, you visited people in their homes. I think you had differentiated that for me. Can you both speak to the different levels and the possibilities of hospice care? It's a big question, but what are you providing at that point? Because if I'm not mistaken, is medical care dwindled, or
right,
no heroics or intervention happens at that point?
Yes. So the progression is really from what you would consider to be the appropriate medical care to palliative care to hospice.
Okay.
So hospice is, so the other thing about hospice that we learned is that it can go on for a long time. Mm-hmm. We were shocked at the number of patients in hospice that were there. We worked with them for over a year, right, and you would expect that they would live no longer than maybe a few weeks.
Okay.
But hospice and the Hospice of Western Reserve is just an unbelievable organization, and the people that make that whole thing happen. We were volunteers. We were well trained. Patricia, you and I talked about the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief, and that was really how we were trained to see things. And so denial to anger to bargaining to depression to final acceptance. But I have to tell you, it didn't work that way at all, because everybody is unique, just as their life is unique. The way in which they encounter the end of life is unique.
Yes.
And so one of the things that was really different was dealing with children. And I really didn't have the temperament to do that, but Mary felt like this was an opportunity to do things for kids not having children, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
They're like little teddy bears, and when they're in pain, it's almost intolerable for anyone to be able to deal with. So anything that you can do to comfort them, holding them, walking them down the hall and skipping with them, laughing with them, just being there, because several of them, their parents had to work.
Yeah.
And so they were there with these wonderful caregivers. And as Don said, hospice is just incredible. But they can't be with everybody at every time.
Right. Right.
And so
I was going to ask you, Mary, out of curiosity, because it's a horrifying experience for anybody to lose a child. Were the children accepting at an earlier stage of their death than adults?
I don't know that many of them really knew what death meant. I think the population of young adults, let's say from 12 to 18, I think they were not as accepting. Why me? How can this be? I'm just I'm just starting my majorette program. I'm just headed for college. So the babies and the really young children, the babies didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just pure love being given by a caregiver. But I think that they knew that there was something wrong with them, but mommy and daddy were with them every day. So it wasn't maybe until the very end when they had to explain that mommy and daddy won't be here tomorrow. And but the young adults, it impacted them.
Very, very hard on them.
Patricia, I watched Mary do this. I couldn't do it. And you did. You had a real gift in bringing comfort and presence. We always describe ourselves. I have too many words, and Mary doesn't have enough words, because she really deals with things in silence. She's a great listener. But I think you were able to bring comfort in the way that was needed for the young babies. But it was difficult, really difficult.
Did you have to how'd you comfort the family members at the end? Is that something you stepped away from, or you participated in that process?
Well, I think there was a great appreciation for both what Mary did in hospice and what I did in homes. I have to say that now I did run into one situation that I'll quickly talk about later, but I'm going to tell you an amazing story. This is a story about Shirley, and Shirley was 100 years old. Shirley was an accomplished classical pianist. She grew up in Ohio, later with her family moved to New Mexico, and then for a time in Mexico. An incredibly creative person and a mind like you wouldn't believe at 100. I was invited by hospice to visit with Shirley at her home. And it was a home that was right next to her daughter and son-in-law. And I remember walking up to the door, and I could hear this beautiful music. And here's the woman that I had met for the first time that we're having a little camera difficulty here to keep us both in focus. It's going crazy.
Okay.
But it was an amazing thing just to hear her play and see this tiny woman who was so full of life. You would never think that she was in the final stages of her life. And so I was invited to read poetry to her. Oh. That's what I was told my job was. And I said, wow, this is great. I love doing this. And so I sit down, we get acquainted, and I said, so you want me to read some poetry to you? And she said, oh, no, not at all. I want to read my poetry to you. She said, I'm 100 years old.
Wow.
She said, I have to make sure that the poems that I leave behind are really good ones. And probably for 40 minutes, she read beautiful poetry.
Wow.
And she said, so I understand you read poetry and you write poetry. And I said, I do. And so from that, I had a session at the Cleveland Clinic. What was it called? It was the Arts and Medicine Institute to really talk about a new book that I had just released. And so I said to Mary, I said, you know what? I think we ought to bring Shirley to this session.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she was unbelievable. She came in on a wheelchair and she read poetry. And then she looked at me and she said, uh-oh, you're supposed to read some of your poems. I said, not to worry. But this was a classic opportunity of the right thing happens. You have a purpose, but there's another purpose that is much higher. And that was the case with Shirley. And she died, and we did 2 other sessions together, but she died after about 9 months of working with her. But those are the kinds of things you encounter.
You know, I looking in your piece, I wanted to talk about this just very briefly.
Sure.
Don, you wrote about the definitions of end of life, dying, and death. You know, they actually have legal definitions and ramifications for how this is defined.
Yes.
And there might be some issues if somebody does not go down that path properly. Did you, at the end, whether it was a child or an older adult, you're in the home or in the hospital, when the person actually, for lack of a better description, and I want you to talk to me about this, is there really the concept that the soul leaves the body goes to sleep? Because dying, as we know, is the active process of the body shutting down.
Right.
This is the point at which the body ceases, but there's all these gray areas that the heart stopped, but the brain's still going, or and you do a DNR, a do not resuscitate, because there's no hope, but maybe there's a little bit of hope. How do you come to terms with all those fuzzy areas at the very end?
Well, I think the first thing
you can answer that. I mean, it's
I think the first thing is just for all of us to understand that we do whatever we can to honor a patient and their family's wishes.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, I don't think, at least our role, we can't go wrong. But I'm going to say something else that it struck me, and mostly listening to Mary's stories about working in healthcare. Doctors have an incredible amount of power. They officially declare you alive and officially declare you dead.
Okay.
So that's a very, very serious responsibility. But what your question points to is really the fundamental motivation and impetus for the whole field of medical ethics and bioethics. And it's incredible the number of physicians that have gone back to really become educated about that whole field so that they can do their job better.
Yes.
And Mary could tell you a lot more about the legal and financial side of things, and if they're not done the way they're supposed to. But I think the thing that we learned, and I think that most of the caregivers that we worked with respected the fact that you need to honor what that patient and family wants. And in that sense, we're really not involved in making those kind of decisions. But you know something? There is always room for caring, for compassion, or just giving presence, sitting with someone and they don't feel alone. That doesn't violate anything.
No. And it's what's unfortunate is that all the negative connotations and attitudes towards death and dying, you guys know more than anything that a lot of people are left to die alone because of that, because of the surviving relatives can't handle it. They don't want to be around it, or they've washed their hands of it when somebody is diagnosed with what we consider a terminal illness. They're like, well, there's nothing we can do anyway. Or one of the things that bothers me to no end, which I hear a lot with Alzheimer's, and towards the end, where people say, well, my mother was no longer my mother because she wasn't the mother I remember. Or I want to tell you a personal story. My father had survived many, many things. He also, in my opinion, died at 77, which was too young. And he had heart disease. He had colon cancer. He survived all of it. And then one day he said, my stomach hurts. And the lady that was taking care of him, because my mother was already gone, said he's really in pain. I'm going to take him to the hospital. And he had an ischemic bowel, which, as you know, there's nothing they can do. And his ejection fraction in his heart was so low, they weren't going to take the chance of operating. So what people don't understand is they say, we will harm him if we operate on him. Well, what's the difference? He has a terminal prognosis. There's so many legal implications and medical implications surrounding that. But we just stayed with him at the end, and we had a hospice nurse come in, and they were very kind to leave him in a room on the cardiac floor in hospice care.
Mm-hmm.
So they really did. This was a Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona. And all of a sudden, he just seemed to be gone. And I became hysterical, and I was laying on top of him, and I was crying. The nurse came in. She goes, I think it's it. This is it. Is there anybody you want me to call? And I said, well, call my sister. And we're 5, and we were taking turns being in there. And my sister was just walking in the room at the time. And my father sat up and hit me in the face. It was just a temporary, a temporary, and we all started hysterical laughing. But it struck me as how quickly you can chalk someone off.
Right.
And there's these stages. You go in and out. You may seem like you're no longer there, and then you rally, and then you go down, and then you rally. And I think that's something that's really important. We need to tell people is that it's a process. You don't just go down, close your eyes, and die in the bed. We hear that in the movies.
Absolutely.
Not really what happens. And I was, I firsthand had an example of that. And then I think he lived another 2 days after that. But we didn't leave. We stayed there the whole time, took turns, didn't shower, the routine. And so I had that experience where, and I mentioned it here in the question a little bit. My mother was the opposite. She was angry. She was defiant. She went kicking and screaming, literally. I don't know if she was in pain and too scared or didn't want to go or whatever it was, but that's the other thing. You need to stay as stoic as possible as the individual providing that care. That's hard to watch, family member or not.
Right.
Yes, and so I just want to mention all that there's many, many ways that this could happen. And I just hope people are a little bit more prepared and more educated about it now, as we move forward, rather than just having this black and white. You both so eloquently broke down the varied views, the beliefs that dying patients may experience, and the best ways to help it. So, tell me how you came to define these outlooks. Did it was just where one person was kicking and screaming, another person was quiet? Did they tell you what they want? Did they seem to be on another plane, if you will, at the end? Some people talk. What were some of your experiences that helped you help the patient?
Well, I think back on Shirley's experience, it was really the classic integrative approach. She saw her life as being fulfilled. She saw what she was about to approach in terms of death as being a part of her life. She really accepted that. And I didn't see a lot of resistance or anger. I wasn't there when she finally passed away, but I do know in talking to her daughter that it was a peaceful passing and that she felt incredibly fulfilled around her life. And so she really did. But I think that when some of the men that I had worked with, and they fall on two sides of a continuum, some are very stoic, and the way they live their lives, whether they were a Marine and, that's what they were and that's how they were, and they showed up in the world every day. They basically tried their best to not burden other people with their suffering about death. And so they just kind of kept it themselves and kind of stoically moved forward. But I'll tell you a story, and it's really a fascinating one, about an Indian businessman who's from Delhi, and he and his wife had moved to Pittsburgh, and they came to the clinic because he had brain cancer. And I worked with him for almost a year, longer than I thought I was going to, and got to know his family extremely well, and his wife, who was a physician. And I felt like I played an important role to the entire family there.
You did.
And yeah, I think I did too. Yeah. But I think that his wife appreciated most what I did. And because of that, they involved me in this. It was a Zoom session, and they had family and friends from all over the world that participated in it. But she asked me to provide some remarks, and I was actually quite surprised. This camera keeps following me, and it
That's
doesn't
okay.
show
I can
very
see you. Yeah. Hmm.
but it really was an amazing experience, and to hear what people had to say about him. But this was very much a Hindu experience, and it was an incredible thing. And I read some poetry, and I felt like I fitted in,
Hmm.
even
Hmm.
though I probably was one of maybe 4 or 5 people that weren't from India. Um,
Hmm.
but you never know what you're going to be asked to do.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, but I think that that's a that's an example. And other people just don't want anybody around. It's just, I'm
Yeah.
going to die. And we've had people in intensive care who have just said, I just want to be left alone, and I'll
Okay.
have to deal with this in my own way.
But what you had mentioned about there are a number of patients we both had who are almost homeless, and
Yeah.
family, and that to me was just so sad. And so you want to make
Yeah.
sure that you give them all the time they need each time they come in, because it's, now this sounds really bad, but it's almost like it's their social hour.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
someone here
Yeah.
who cares about them
Yeah.
and knows that you're going to stay no matter how long it takes. And so the role that all of the caregivers like Don and I have been, they're so vital to um, the the dying process, whether it's the beginning of the disease or whether it's at the end of the disease.
So I know that you had some actual uh, processes that you did. There was touch therapy, there was meditation, there was mindfulness, journaling, life coaching. I'm just going down some of the things that you
Sure.
mentioned. And I like the stoic person and the hysterical person, there's probably levels and variations of what people would allow you to do. And it
Mhm.
was also pre-pandemic that you were doing this, right?
That's when it started.
It's
Yeah.
yes,
It
yes,
started during the pandemic,
yes.
yeah.
And then we did it.
And so how did that, I'm curious how, and I know how rewarding this is for both of you, how did that affect you to go and actually be physically present with whether it's touch therapy, something as simple as putting your arm on their shoulder to actual hug, how did that, how did you, how has that changed you? How has that affected you?
Mary and I have talked every night. We work 2 days a week at
Hmm.
Taussig Cancer
Hmm.
Institute. And so every night we talked about the patients that we worked with. And initially there was an awkwardness. We felt like we were being intrusive, that we were doing something that we weren't sure whether it was really wanted. But eventually we saw that people were very open. Most of them were very open to the services that we had to provide. Some did not want to be touched,
Hmm.
and that ruled out gentle touch relaxation therapy, because you are putting your hands on patients. Um, and some struggled with mindfulness because it requires concentration. And when you are totally inundated trying to deal with your appointments and your medications and family members and finances and everything, it's really hard to concentrate. So this is not, it's not the ideal time to learn how to meditate.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
my very first patient that I had, the very first day that we started providing, I strictly did Reiki.
Okay.
And I went up to the nurses and introduced myself, and they knew that we were coming. And so they said, well, such and such is down at the end of the hall, and I'm not sure she'll want to, but you may want to go and talk with her. And so I walked in the door, and I introduced myself to her, and she was knitting and probably in her late 40s, early 50s. And I thought, oh, okay. And I explained to her what I offered. And so she was, indifferent, but she said, sure, what else? What am I going to do here? And I thought, oh my gosh. And she was a doctor at the clinic. And that just was like, oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we ended up having such a wonderful, close, intimate relationship about feelings and family. And for all the fear that I had going in and knowing, oh my first patient, oh boy, what if I do something wrong?
Yeah.
But you never know what people are experiencing inside. She actually was looking for something like that. And so you can't make any assumptions when you walk into a patient's room.
Right.
You just can't.
It's a fresh start with each person.
Yes, absolutely.
The other thing I want to ask both of you is that, and whoever wants to answer, is the cause of death also seems to play, or the illness that the person's experience seems to play a role in the patient's outlook as well as the around them. For example, the long, slow death from cancer that could, like you mentioned, go on for years, or sudden death, or someone's ill and they're gone within 3 weeks. What did you see? What difference did you see in people that had a terminal illness and knew they had some time compared to people who were hit with something they're told they have 3 to 8 months to live?
Well, I think there's a big difference, but then again, I think people are who they are living and as they go through the end of life process. For some, it's a greater opportunity to accept and to resolve some things. For others, they know they're going to die, and it's just the roller coaster of up and down, moving from chemotherapy and radiation to clinical trials to stem cell therapy and to many other things. But it's very trying. For some, it's just I've run out of options. The quality of my life is no longer what it should be, and for some, it was just I think probably it's just time for me to die.
Yeah.
And but everybody is different. I worked with 2 years for a young man, and his wife was just a wonderful person, and he finally died of started with colorectal cancer that had spread. But he was an intriguing guy. We had a lot of discussions about what lies on the other side. What is the afterlife really all about? I told him about my experience of growing up, where it was heaven, hell, fire, brimstone, and that's the way it was. And he said, I grew up in a family that sometimes went to church, but we really didn't have any firm beliefs about any of these things. And I said, well, mine have evolved, and we had an opportunity to really share about that. But the one thing that he found interesting was to really think about consciousness as what carries over as opposed to the spirit or soul, which is very much an East Asian concept that you find in India or in Tibet, where there's really a recognition that there is something that carries on, but maybe that's not a soul in the way in which we understand it. But I think those conversations helped him, but they helped me too. And for a lot of patients, sometimes it was just listening to them. So we called that active listening. And that was very beneficial to them because they could say things to us that they couldn't say to their doctors, they couldn't say to their family members. And for some, it was the sheer fear of not existing anymore. And this was Paul, another pianist, who he would shake because he was so afraid. And yet, I just was there. I held him, and I think that was the only thing I could do. There was no intellectualizing in this case. It was such deep gut emotions. But Patricia, it takes its toll on you. It's not easy work.
Yeah, I'd like to just interject about
Yeah.
the young people that came in as patients. And I remember one young woman, early 20s, had just had a baby like 4 months prior. Her husband was there and he was terrified. Her parents were there. And so I, offered what I would like to do to try and help her. And so it took a couple minutes between she and her husband. And then she said, yes, I think I'd like to try it. And the mom and dad were in there, and he said, no, you are not going to do that. You are not going to put your hands on my daughter. You're not going to do anything like that with her. And I said, I understand completely, and left. A couple times later, her father came and apologized to me. And he said, I really would like you to see if you can do anything to calm my daughter. Yeah. And then we had ongoing sessions for not quite a year, but it just, you have to give people the opportunity, because this is a whole different world for, a lot of people, and to come in and say, I'm here, I'd like to offer Reiki, which is just a very gentle touch relaxation. Well, they're not even thinking about that. They're thinking about, no, it sounds too woo-woo.
Yes, yes.
So you graciously thank them for allowing you to come into their room, and it's their call. And
yeah.
The first no doesn't mean terminal no, but they need time to understand.
Wait, so that is an interesting question that she's the patient and her father was intervening and stopping. Have you intervened on that, or you just step away? You let the family work it out? Have you?
Oh, yes.
Because I think our first instinct is like, shut up, it's her decision. You want to say,
well, internally, probably so.
She's the patient, you're not, yeah, but you don't want to upset everybody. And it's a, yeah, that's a difficult. I want to ask you too, did people make did they make confession to you? Was that a big thing too, of people telling you about threats or things they did, they wish they would have told someone, or they wish they wouldn't have done, or almost maybe sometimes it's funny, they snuck out of the house or did something behind their parents' back, or, that relatively harmless, but as a young person, you think it's a horrible thing. I mean, did you find people confiding in you in that way?
Yes. Yeah. Mostly it has to do with feelings of regret, of things that they wish they had done. And so I can think of a couple of patients where that was the case. And they talked about how they didn't deal well with certain pivotal situations. In the one case, it was the death of a brother, and how they basically just couldn't get over that, and just the ugliness of how they treated each other.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of regret because this guy didn't have the opportunity to resolve that. And it's not something he really wanted to talk about, because as he said, I wish I could just forget it. But I think that was there were some that shared things like that.
Screen.
I'm off the screen.
There are so many stories. I mean, just so many. And one story during the last couple months that we were working, there was a young woman in her late 30s, early 40s, and very nice. And so she told me all about her husband, and they had just gone fishing out west somewhere, and they had another trip planned, and now they had to cancel it. So we did Reiki together for months and months, and then she came back one day and said, "I'm good to go. I'm good to go." And so they planned their trip. The next time she came in, she said, "It's back. I can't go." So there are so many hurdles and so many
Right.
emotions, that get shut down or get risen up to be good. It's mind-boggling.
But Mary, they're all small miracles in themselves. That it brought back. I guess the flip side of the roller coaster is that there is some hope and there is some happiness and there's some joy and some family time and doing things during that period, which is kind of like a microcosm of life. That we have that throughout our lives, through that process.
Very much so.
Now, going forward, in life and in the world, how do we make this conversation a mainstay in the lives of all patients? So, how do we get? What's the answer to provide these resources for all?
Any thought?
Well, I have two thoughts that quickly. First of all, it's getting the buy-in from the caregiver.
Yeah.
The physician, the parent, the organization. I mean, there are some organizations that may not even want anyone to receive these services. So I would say for me, that would be, but you probably have a little different answer.
Well, I think there's always a role for education, but I think the most important thing when you introduce anything new, and it doesn't have to be a service like we provided, it could be anything, is to understand the person and how they deal with their reality, and to try to make it relevant to them, as opposed to just saying, this is, oh, you don't need this, you don't need this, I guess there's nothing we can do for you. But I think the central thing, and this is something that Mary and I practiced all the time, and we were aware of this from actually the beginning, is the importance of self-care. Self-care by cancer patients, by their family members, healthcare providers. Everybody needs to engage in self-care, because in the absence of that, we go from, we've got this vessel that has this much life in it, or life energy. And when it drops down this low, it takes a lot more work to build back up. So we have to do things on a regular basis that really keep us in a good energetic state. But I think self-care is something that everyone could benefit more from. And in a lot of ways, it didn't really matter whether people needed what I had to offer. A lot of times it was just a conversation. And so we called those meaningful encounters. And Mary and I both did a lot of meaningful encounters with patients. And in a lot of ways, those turned out to be a better giving opportunity and created a space for interaction and comfort and caring, more so than just doing meditation or doing something that was journaling or life coaching.
Or just being fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
That's so important. I mean, I loved to be the silly person, at times, because they loved that, because they didn't get much of that anymore. Right. And so sometimes they would just burst out laughing and I'd say, what are you laughing at? Knowing what they were laughing at. But, if they can laugh and have joy along with the pain and the, fear, it's important to provide that as well.
Here's another thing, Patricia, that we learned was that Mary and I not only are great life partners and can live together and deal with all those kinds of things, but we actually can work together. And a lot of people, a lot of couples, whether you're married or just in a partnership relationship, cannot work together.
Mhm.
And so we were able to do that. And I think that that was a shared experience that in a lot of ways we learn more from and learn more about each other than other things that we've done.
So I have one question for you before we close, is that has this altered the way that you would like your end of life to be?
Good question. Personal question. Wow.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think that I've always been good at thinking about these things, and I've been less, I'll use the word less good
Okay.
at being able to deal with the emotional side of it. But I think that for me, I recognize that there was still a legacy that I had to create, that I wanted to give. That's largely been in my writing, but it's been in my photography, it's been in my poetry, it's been in my painting. And so the being able to pass that on is really become important to me, and it's helped me to feel more confident about the next step in my journey.
Mhm.
I don't take any next steps. I am like probably totally opposite Don. I don't want to think about it.
Mm.
I don't want to have to prepare for it. I know I will, but yeah.
But you'll deal with it when the time
Right.
comes.
Right.
So that's the way Mary has been ever since we met,
Mhm.
1987. I mean, this is,
Wow.
but she always finds a way to deal with it. But she doesn't live as much in her head, so I just kind of thrive on this. There's an interesting book, and Mary, could you reach the book that's up on the shelf? It's the blue book. No, come over to the right. Yeah, that one. And it's a book that I had when I was in divinity school. That's called "What Survives: Contemporary Explorations of Life After Death,"
Mhm.
and it provides a really excellent overview of the different ways in which we philosophically and how medicine and even society deals with this whole issue of passing on. So we find ourselves in, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, we find ourselves in a society now that has decided to brand itself as Christian America.
Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, overstepping the boundaries of the political arena and everything else. And I think to force that on people is probably one of the biggest acts of inhumanity that we can ever exercise, because people are so different.
Yes.
And to prescribe that and to recognize this nation as just that is a serious mistake.
Yeah. I appreciate that because it doesn't allow for people to be individuals and to be who they want. And laws are dictated around that, and policies and attitudes and perceptions. And it's you're absolutely right. And that's something that
Yeah.
I think we need to fight back at some point. Mary and Don, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It was an amazing conversation of great importance that needs to keep going. I've asked Don this before, and Mary, so you got to keep the camera on both of you for this one. Is I want you to ask both of you, what do you like about getting older? Mary.
Oh my gosh. Being totally independent.
Mhm.
I worked from the day I graduated from college in 1972 until this past June.
Okay.
And I love just doing what I want when I want with us together. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, it's certainly the presence of wisdom, and I think it's a lot of things that anybody can relate back to. We call them time-honored truth, perennial
Yes.
philosophy,
Yes.
things that have always in various different ways been recognized as truth. And so I think a lot of those things have been a part of my life, but I'm actually grateful for the opportunity to have reinvented myself since 2016 and to do the things that I've done and that Mary and I have been able to do together. So growing older has actually allowed and created space for that.
And brought a lot of vitality back. You know what I mean? It's like
Yes.
when
Yes.
you're embarking on new things and
Yeah.
you do feel young again. You feel like, wow, I'm just starting out. And,
Yeah.
it turns that switch back on in your brain about what you want to do and your creativity. It makes you think a lot about what are you going to do, as we say, the quality of years. Like I always say, instead of buying things, buy experiences. Instead of,
Right.
saying, what's the next best thing I have to have? You don't have to have anything, but
Yeah.
love and joy and experiences. So that's great. So again, thank you both so much. To be continued. I mean, this is a conversation that, can go on forever. So
Thank you,
thank you
Patricia.
both very much. And
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you listening. I'm Patricia Greenberg. This is It's Okay to Be Old. And for more shows on aging well, please subscribe to this channel. And for more information, feedback, and topic ideas, you can reach me at www.patriciagreenberg.com. So thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you.